our roundtable on consumer behavior. Today we have with us Professor Russell Belk of the Department of Marketing at the University of Utah, Professor Deborah Scammon, also with the Department of Marketing, and Professor David Kiefer with the Department of Economics, also with the University of Utah. And we have with us Mr. John Youngren. He's Creative Service Director at Mountain Cable Advertisement of Utah. And welcome, and thank you for coming. Today we want to talk about consumers, and probably one of the first questions we're considering is that when we study markets, neoclassical economists say that markets allocate resources efficiently and they maximize economic welfare. In order, however, to come up with these conclusions, we have to model the behavior of consumers. And so, Professor Kiefer, can you tell us how economists model consumer behavior?
Well, as you know, Mary, we have a theory of consumer behavior, and it starts with the recognition that people have needs and they have tastes, but they also have a budget, and they're faced with limited resources to fulfill those needs. Many things affect their decisions. We make a long list of them, and they include such things as their income and the prices that they have to pay, also culture, also peer pressure, also fads, and the list could go on, but we really focus on price in economics because the end result is a demand curve. Mm-hmm. We've drawn it on the blackboard, and it's got quantity consumed and price on the other axis, and we ignore most everything else and then focus on just the monetary aspects of behavior, and that's the basis of the theory of supply and demand.
Mm-hmm. So, in neoclassical economics, price and income are one of the primary determinants of consumer decision-making, given their tastes and preferences. Now, would you agree that's the best way to model consumers, Professor Belk, or not?
In word, not. Marketing was sort of born of economics, and traditionally marketing also has assumed a rational, utility maximizing, cognitive information processing consumer.
Can you give me an example what you mean by rational, utility maximizing consumer? If you go in a supermarket, show me how you behave in this maximizing way.
Well, to stereotype or caricature a little bit, you would compare prices if you were buying soap in order to get the most satisfactory soap for the money. It wouldn't necessarily be the lowest price, but it would be the one that gives you the most benefit for the dollars that you're spending.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it would be, in that sense, rational. It would be information processing. You're looking at prices, you're looking at ingredients, you're looking at anything else that might bring you pleasure and satisfaction. But this is the traditional model, derived mostly from economics and a little bit from psychology, the information processing part. Mm-hmm. More and more, we're finding that consumers, rather than behaving this way, do a couple of things. They may satisfy us. They may just buy a bar of soap because it's there without really caring if they're getting a good bargain or maximizing their utility. And secondly, they may buy very emotionally based on what we would think of as being irrational characteristics, the color, the package design, the jingle for the soap, and so forth, which may or may not be the best thing if you are a utility maximizer. But one of the developing ideas is that rather than trying to maximize the benefits we receive, we're really striving to put some passion, some emotion in our lives, and we have a desire to desire, sometimes called a second-order desire. And increasingly, sociologists are talking about this as being a product of the Romantic Revolution, the consumer revolution that followed the Industrial Revolution, that rather than buying for the sake of necessity and need, we're really trying to inject some passion, some romanticism, and that there may be nothing wrong with that. But as a result of it, what we're really seeking is not the benefit of the good itself, but the state of anticipatory desire and continually renewing that with ever more things to hope for.
Mm-hmm. So this implies we spend a lot of time in our lives thinking about what we're going to consume instead of not just actually consuming it, but the whole process of idealizing what it is we want to buy and what we expect to get from it. Could you say that? Or
Yeah, and you buy magazines, for example, and watch television programs and movies partly with a desire to stimulate your own desires, to find neat new things to want. And so if you're a skier, you may buy the ski magazine in order to find new skis that you can want, new ski clothing that you can yearn for. And it's in a sense giving us some hope, something to believe in, and it's a sphere that once we might have vested in religion or science, and now increasingly we vest in consumption.
So our increasing consumption, so I want to get at what that represents, and I wanted to ask you a question. In 100 years ago, the Utah pioneers needed 2 pairs of shoes. And I want to ask Deborah, how many pairs of shoes do you have? David, how many do you have? And can you tell me why?
I couldn't even count the number of pairs of shoes in my closet because I have shoes for every special purpose that you could imagine. I have ski boots and hiking boots and riding boots, and the riding boots come in all kinds of varieties because I do different styles of riding. So each one of them has a particular purpose, and I absolutely need those boots and shoes.
So you need them. And so do you need all of your shoes, David, that you have?
Yes, I need them all. I have at least 10 pair, and I think I have at least 3 pairs of ski boots.
Okay, now, when they say they need shoes, what do they mean by that? I mean, do needs change over time, or what's going on here? Russell?
I would use the word want or desire rather than need. When we say that we need something, although there are sort of instrumental things that we need in order to do something else to satisfy a deeper motive. But when we really use the word need, we're talking about biological needs, things that are really necessities. What is a necessity and what is a luxury, however, is socially defined, and it keeps escalating. And so when we say that we need 3 pairs of ski boots, we sort of naturalize that desire so no one can question it. If it's a need, yes, of course. You need 3 pairs of ski boots.
Okay. Now, this gets me to another question about these needs or preferences or tastes. Where do they originate from? And since you're the ad man, I want to ask you, when you create an advertisement, is it created to give us information, or is it created to give us desire to purchase something?
Well, I think preferably, honestly, probably a little bit of both. I mean, I think we live in a tremendously advertising-driven culture at this point. The popularity of television and mass medium, I think, creates a need. I guess we're taking advantage to some extent over what we're referring to here as the irrational needs of the consumer, because I know from my own experience as a consumer, there will be times when it's, I just have to have a pair of those basketball sneakers, the Nike Air Jordans, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to fit in. That's, of course, driven by the mass marketing campaign, the advertisements with Michael Jordan in them. And I think in that sense, it's very much fueling the irrational side of me, because any pair of sneakers would probably work. But in that sense, it's the ones I want. So then taking it on the other side, looking at it from the creator's standpoint of an advertisement, I'd say what we're trying to impart to people is the bottom line information, how much this will cost, what its features are, what it will do for you. But to do it right, to hook the consumer, so to speak, I think you want to take advantage of that little extra part of them that makes it seem more appealing or more appetizing to have your product, or to go to your store, or to visit your place of service. So essentially, I'm talking about a combination, and I'm not so sure it's always a 50-50 split. I think sometimes the information aspect is almost secondary to the entertainment value of a good advertisement or of a good TV commercial. So
now, when you buy those Nikes, can you jump as high as Michael Jordan?
Oh, of course not. And I think everybody knows that kind of going in. I think more what you're buying in that standpoint is status, or a certain amount of peer approval. You're going to turn up. You're going to have the best piece of equipment. I don't ski, but I know that those here at the table who have mentioned they do probably go out and buy a pretty good ski name in terms of their boot or their skis, so that when they turn up at the lodge on a Saturday afternoon, they can fit in, and I think that's driven by print medium and an advertisement that you might see in the back of a ski magazine. And maybe I'm the wrong one here, but most of the people I associate with and know, both in and out of the advertising business, are to some degree influenced by that kind of the status of it more than anything else.
But this tends to imply where we're going in this conversation is that our tastes and preferences of what we want tend to be manipulated by the media. But isn't it also true that when people really change their tastes and preferences based on changing world, for example, now we may prefer more environmentally sensitive products or more nutritionally balanced products. How do producers get that information and then respond by putting those products on their shelves? And I was wondering if you could tell me something, Deborah, about this process.
Well, in almost any product category, there's going to be one or more really involved consumers who are really critical. They really know what they're doing in a product area. The skier who skis a lot knows the functional attributes of the ski, and they're the ones that give that signal to the marketer at first in terms of what the product should be made like.
How does the marketer get that signal?
Usually those are very vocal consumers. They talk readily about what their wants are, and they communicate that to people who can build something to meet those needs. And so they sort of lead the market. With regard to environmental products, it isn't the average consumer on the street who has caused marketers to provide more environmentally friendly products. It is those who are vitally concerned about the quality of the environment who have suggested that they would really like to have these kinds of products. The marketer may test that out in a pilot test in some small market and see what the response is, and if there's sufficient response, then that leads to a larger scale production of the product. So at the cue of the leader, the consumer leader in the industry, then the manufacturer provides the product, and then the average consumer who may not have thought about the environmental qualities of products see them there on the shelf and say, oh, well, this soap washes my body or washes my clothes equally as well as that other product does, and by the way, it's biodegradable, so I think I'll give that a try. So it's over time and evolution into the market for new things.
So when a new market develops for these products based on characteristics like environmental friendliness or nutritional quality, is there a problem with labeling them? I mean, do other firms start putting this stamp on their product, this is environmentally safe, just to respond to this growing market? I mean, do we need the government to regulate this information for the consumer, or?
Well, there certainly is an opportunity for those who would take advantage of the consumer to do so when some new attribute is introduced into the market where consumers don't have enough knowledge about it and don't have the ability to examine for themselves and find out whether in fact the product is or is not biodegradable or more environmentally friendly. So they have to rely on somebody else to provide that accurate information or to certify the accuracy of the information that's being provided to them. So in that sense, there is an opportunity for governmental or self-regulatory intervention in the market.
And after all, there is this old maxim about let the buyer beware. What's that in Latin?
Caveat emptor.
That's the one I was thinking of. Doesn't that still apply? And wouldn't that suggest that we don't really need the government to regulate advertising?
Well, anybody want to make a comment on that?
Well, I think you see it as things, you know, for example, still to this day, I think there's confusion in the marketplace and among general consumers over just what the phrase is, you know, fat-free or 100% fat-free or low-fat or those variations upon some kind of a fat-free type of phrase even mean. I mean, I think maybe that's an area, and I believe the government has looked into that in terms of defining and putting a pretty strict set of definitions on what a company can and cannot say about its food product. And I think that a few years ago, and I'm only talking about a couple of years ago really, that there was great confusion. I mean, I can remember plucking things off the shelves and thinking, great, fat-free, and then realizing later that's not quite what they meant, you know. And so I think to that extent, maybe there does need to be some sort of government intervention or regulation of just what phrases like that mean, particularly in something like a food product or, you know, that could be inherently absolved. So,
well, David, if you think buyers beware, what about the informational content of what I'm actually purchasing? For example, if I go and buy a used car or I go to get medical services, should I be aware of what I'm actually consuming in terms of medical tests, and how do I get that information? And
well, medicine is a special area. I mean, that's life or death, and we want to be sure that fraud doesn't occur with respect to medical services.
But it's not
we might
fraud
not be
if
so
I
concerned
buy
about
something
granola,
that I think
though.
is fat-free and it's not.
Well,
It's petty fraud in a
but
way.
it's not life or death, is it?
It adds up. I may not die, but
Well, it's the same with children and elderly and other groups that we think are disadvantaged, that we think we owe some special protection to. And so we set age limits and we set different standards of advertising for children. But what we're talking about is really the informational side of advertising and not the non-informational side. And we don't do much to regulate puffery in advertising, for example, which may not be bad, because when we buy something like a perfume, we're not really buying the ingredients or a tangible physical benefit. We're buying a promise. We're buying hope, and we want that image. The image is very much a part of what we're buying.
But now, David, I want to get back to this about regulation of information in markets in terms of advertisement. Do you think the government has a role to ensure that when we buy something, we know exactly what we're getting? I mean, doesn't this allow us to make more rational decisions? And I'd also like you to comment on the fact that when you go into a grocery store and you buy something, if you know that what's written there has like a standard, it's been standardized by the government, you understand what it means, it saves your time in the sense of having to read and compare all of these products. Since people require more, I mean, time is scarce these days. More and more people are working. There's more two-income earning couples. There's women with children going shopping. Do they always have time to beware and compare products?
If we could reform the system, our system, so that information were better and was more easily obtained, that would be good. It would make all of the things we say about the economy work better, because, well, you know, economists are always accused of assuming everything away and making assumptions. One of the assumptions that goes into the law of supply and demand is that consumers have perfect information, or very good information. Information about what? About prices and about qualities, all those things that you said, that would make the market run more efficiently, if it were possible.
Okay. Does anybody want to go on with that about the role of government and information in terms of the consumer? Or?
I might just make a comment with regard to your suggestion that the more standardized the information is, if we're used to the terminology, if we're used to the format, it saves us time and we can shop more efficiently using less time and so forth. One of the difficulties with standardizing information too much is that it loses the richness of the underlying information, which that standard is based upon. And then the consumer who may want to know not only that the product is healthy because it's low in sodium, low in fat, and low in cholesterol, they're only concerned maybe about sodium. And if the label healthy is put on the product, it is less meaningful to them than if each of the individual attributes of the product were disclosed. So there's some danger in oversimplifying when we try to standardize, which is the tendency that we often follow when we're using governmental regulation to solve consumer problems.
But if you try to stick with the original information, you wind up with the problem of information overload. That there's too much information and consumers just ignore it all rather than pay more attention.
Right.
And we come back to price, of course.
Yes.
Another surrogate cues.
You know, John said in his ads they always mention the price. And Russell said, well, there are these second-order things. Would you agree that the price is still the first-order thing that consumers are concerned about?
I would say, and I'm sorry, I think when we get to the bottom line, I mean, I'm not sure we do always mention the price. If I implied that earlier, I'm not sure that was correct, because
he's the ad man.
Yeah, when possible, of course, the price is going to come into it. But if you can take advantage, as I was saying earlier, of, again, a person's irrational set of emotions, things that drive them in more ways than the price, I think there's a certain sense among advertisers that when they get to the store, they'll see how much it is, but they'll have already decided in their head, I want this. So if they haven't done their research and they turn up, chances are the emotional side of it will carry them through the sale. That might be a naive viewpoint, but I know it's one that is subscribed to by people I've worked with, you know.
But if price were always the bottom line, all those high-priced products would be driven out of existence if consumers really are striving for the lowest price. And in fact, we know with snob effects and Veblen effects that consumers sometimes strive to pay the highest price that they can.
What do you mean by Veblen effects?
Well, Veblen talked about conspicuous consumption and about flaunting wealth as a way to demonstrate or acquire power and status in society. And if we buy the highest price good, and if other people know that, and if there's also a snob effect because very few people can afford to have the highest price good, we potentially acquire status to the extent that people do value that and give us or attribute esteem and prestige as a result.
Okay, now you're focusing on price, but another question I want to look at is the role of income. And when we look at price in economics, usually we're comparing apples and oranges, and whichever is relatively cheaper, we substitute towards that and buy it. The role of price is this kind of allocative mechanism when you have substitutes. But what if we considered consumers basing their decision on this hierarchy of wants? Before I buy the tape deck, I need to have a place to live. And then I use my income to buy clothes, and then I use my income to buy food, and then the television, and on and on. How does that, I mean, is that a model of consumer behavior that some people talk about, and how does it enter
Well,
into?
it's our other big variable. In economics, we have price and then we have income. And everything else we leave for the marketing and the advertising. And we don't talk much about that, but income, we talk about that a lot. Of course, the budget constraint really determines a lot of what people can buy and do buy. And a change in income will certainly change that their behavior.
I have to disagree with that. It sounds rational and it sounds nice, but based on some work I've done in the so-called second, third, and fourth worlds, it's not the case that people necessarily satisfy what are supposedly lower order needs before moving on to higher order needs.
And lower order needs are?
Food, clothing,
Okay.
shelter, basics that we need to survive biologically before moving on to higher order needs. People sacrifice such things as food and nutrition and health care in order to afford refrigerators, ironically, to keep food that they don't have in, and televisions and VCRs. 90% of all households now in Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou have televisions, and it's a pattern that's being replicated around the world. People forego having children.
This is good for America. We have bigger markets if people
although we
forego.
don't produce many televisions
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah, but then what would you say to that, David? Is that rational? I buy the television and the refrigerator, forsake the children.
I think I would respond that I can't judge what is rational for a resident of Shanghai. And if it's rational for that person to buy a television before health care, well, that was their decision. They certainly are still responding to price and income constraints when they do that. And so I wouldn't want to make any judgment about what's good for the consumer. I'll let the consumer make that themselves. They're the best ones to judge.
Okay.
If you strictly apply that argument, then we shouldn't have laws regulating advertising and marketing either, and children should be able to buy drugs and alcohol and cigarettes because that's what they've judged to be best for them.
Ah, that's an interesting question. So we're not really willing to go as far as I have said socially in deciding what's good for people.
Well,
We all
do
have a
when
feeling of paternalism for what's really good for people.
we do that in our welfare system in terms of giving in-kind goods rather than cash. Programs that give food stamps instead of just the lump sum cash to buy the food is a way of saying, this is what I think you should do first, and this is how you should behave. So, well, back to this question about income. When you do marketing, how important is the income group the person belongs to in terms of how you market a product? Does it vary by income level? Or when you're targeting an ad, does it vary by income level? And perhaps, Deborah, you've been quiet, so we'll...
Income is usually correlated with a lot of other things that are probably more important to the way a product is marketed or advertised than is the income itself. income will be a good indicant of lifestyle, and that may suggest how a person might use a particular product, the circumstances in which they will be using the product, the other people that will see them using that product. So it's a cue to lots of other things that are underlying. But in a very simple model, income would be a good way of segmenting a market and then choosing different appeals to attract consumers of different income levels. So it often gets used, but probably not just for its own sake, but because it is a good signal.
Did you? Okay, and probably one last question I've been waiting to ask you this. I've read some of your work. We talk about products and commodities as having a usefulness. They either give us the, we can consume them or consume the characteristics associated with consuming them. And so you would think, what would determine whether we have markets for goods or not? And I remember reading something you wrote saying we don't have a market for body parts. Why not? I mean, if we're rational, shouldn't there be a market for this? I mean, there's certainly a demand for them, and there's certainly a supply. And why doesn't a market develop?
Because there are laws basically that preclude such a thing, and there have been a few prominent cases featured in the media where, for instance, someone in Turkey whose daughter was dying, needed money, sold one of his kidneys to someone in Great Britain, and there was an uproar. This is the first world exploiting the second, third world, and potentially it's going to be the rich aggrandizing themselves at the expense of the poor. And so we try to keep organ donation still within the gift realm rather than the economic exchange realm, and saying it should be a gift, that there we keep it away from the potential disservice that we do to certain classes or certain nations.
If we had a world of perfect income inequality, would we have the same argument?
Presumably not, but that's a very hypothetical question.
So what's driving it is this inequity in the distribution of income, or that you can have a situation possibly where people need to sell body parts.
That, and you could also have different values that Buddhists see donating their eyes as being a more honorable thing to do, but primarily economic distributions.
Okay, well, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed the roundtable. Okay.